and Eli Rubashkyn is originally from Costa Rica. I'm sorry, is originally from Colombia. Sorry, Eli, and Ukraine, which is somewhat in the news these days. But currently, Eli lives in New Zealand. And I want to now turn this over to Eli, who I'm a huge fan of your science, your understanding of the evidence, because it's not just the human stories, it's also the evidence that is incredibly important in this area. And you know that there's a lot of junk science and there's a lot of misuse of evidence in the whole harm reduction space, also in discussions around LGBTQ issues, which I hope you might reflect on, and in the drug harm reduction space in general.
Yeah, that's correct. And I guess what I would say is that it's this frustration in a way that drive the work I do, because I'm a scientist, but as well I'm an activist, not just for harm reduction, but also for the rights of LGBTI people around the world. And I guess that that frustration keeps building, and I guess some of us, and I think most of us, are feeling that frustration when we see the misinformation, that deliberate misinformation that it's actually in every single space of the work we do. We have to constantly battle loads and loads of misinformation. And I guess that as a scientist, it is very difficult that when you have to battle misinformation, because when you understand the evidence, when you understand how deep is the level of evidence, but then you see the huge level of misinformation, I mean, you cannot just only imagine it's just the frustration that we feel as individuals, as humans. And that frustration, makes us feel that what is the point of all of this? What is the point of even trying to be part of this change? I am really making any difference. When I'm providing all my evidence knowledge as a chemist, as a pharmacist, is this really changing the world that I'm living in? And I can reflect on that, on the experiences that the LGBTI movement has experienced. And some of you might know, the LGBTI movement has very recently become very visible, I think, in the world. But as you were saying, Ethan, and was mentioning also Charles, the LGBTI movement has been struggling for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So just imagine the level of frustration and pain that LGBTI individuals have been experiencing during those years. I mean, and a little bit deeper, because it's individuals that are not or were not allowed to just be who they are, and they were just tortured, discriminated, punished in multiple ways. And even today, in 70 countries, being LGBTQI is a crime, and even in the United States, things are very horrible for many LGBTI people. As a matter of fact, one of the elements that I'm focusing my current activism is the mutilations that are practiced on intersex babies in the United States, which are happening everywhere in the United States and pretty much everywhere in the world. So just imagine how distorted the reality needs to be, that we are validating the mutilations of babies' genitals just because we have to conform of ideas of normality. And if that's happening in the medical world, it's just expected that we're going to be facing with these challenges, because evidence is not always what matters. It is a particular view of the world and a particular agenda. And vaping is not something that this agenda, or the current agenda that we have in the world, is really willing to normalize and accept. So as I've seen on my battles as a scientist and also as a human rights activist for the LGBTI community, I just come to the realization that the most important thing is understanding that we are individuals and we are humans, that we are fighting for deep structural change that we need in our society, but we need to look after ourselves. And looking after ourselves, taking care of ourselves, is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. It's an act of revolutionary love. It's an act of radical love and justice with oneself. It's an act of compassion. And I guess some of us, and I personally must say, and be very honest, I am experiencing burnout at multiple levels, because look at the state of the world these days. We are experiencing a pandemic where misinformation is just everywhere and rampant, and people are feeding themselves with so much BS about the conspiracy theories and cabals and all these incredible levels of misinformation. And at the same time, we're experiencing all these turmoils, wars, and yeah, we are living right now in very challenging times. And but I want to also recognize that we need to understand that burnout, it is a big problem as well. Because burnout is not in our hearts or in our heads, but in the real world, where there is a lack of justice. The people I work alongside don't burn out, and they don't hurt me. They transform me, they challenge me, and they inspire me for the work I do. What harms me are the injustices, indignities suffered by all of us, and my frustrating inability to personally, as myself, as a scientist, to change the unjust structures of society, as we struggle to find a way to find meaning in all of this. That's why I believe in the power of justice doing, but always understanding the collective ethics of justice doing. Because we have to hold in solidarity and practice self-care and self-compassion. Because we are living in dramatic cultural and social times. And we've done some changes. That's why I like to bring the fight for the LGBTI justice. The movement actually erupted and was known around the world because of a pandemic of HIV that was ignored, because it was just the gays are the ones that are dying with HIV and we don't care about them. So minimizing the harm that was causing HIV was actually one of the frustrating elements that created this tension in society, that transformed those structures of oppression against LGBTI people, that brought us what we are living in today. As a diamond, those pressing forces that are resisting change, those backlashes that are against that change, are the ones that are actually for today creating that liberation that we've been seeking for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the social justice that was experienced by the LGBTI movement emerged during a pandemic. And I just want to remind that all of you, because we are living in very, very similar times. And I guess health is going to be one of those elements that we have to rethink, because it's a justice element that we have to rework and think, because it's causing a lot of pain in our communities, and our smokers and people that use different drugs, and people that want to engage with less harmful ways to use substances that are as harmful as caffeine. And nicotine is not going to disappear. Nicotine is going to be with us. It's going to stay with us. Nicotine is part in the structures of our receptors in our brain. Nicotine is going to be here, and that's it. We just have to be strong in a way of practicing compassion, self-care, and yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Ellie. Passionate presentation, and I really loved that. I was reflecting on how in the 1990s, there's a whole nother advocacy movement that we've only touched on slightly, which is the HIV/AIDS advocacy movement, which is huge. And the fact is that it was lawmakers or policymakers and the public's fear of HIV/AIDS, that my little girl might get HIV/AIDS, that helped to tilt. It's awkward to say this, but it helped to tilt the needle towards safe needle exchange programs, safe injection sites, which are now, they're not really fully embraced by the public health community yet. I would even point out the World Health Organization took an extremely strong prohibitionist stance on all drugs for decades, for a long time, until some human rights organizations began to point out to them that there were countries in the world that were executing drug users based on World Health Organization recommendations. And that's kind of like a violation of human rights. Violating human rights, social justice for LGBTI people, huge issues. And in the tobacco harm reduction space, we haven't really pressed those buttons as much as we could or should, because it's huge. A very high percentage of people who are smoking in the countries that have got their smoking rates down to whatever, 14, 15%, are adults living with mental health conditions. I don't have a direct question to you, but I would ask you to reflect on the concept of stigma. So LGBTI, people in the LGBTI community, people who use nicotine, people who use drugs, people who are homeless, people who have it, or people who are living with HIV, they all face stigma. People who are living with mental health conditions face stigma, and if they use nicotine at the same time, it's a double stigma. So this is not a specific question, but can you reflect on that?
Yeah, and I think that stigma is nicotine users, I would say, are experiencing in one way and in another, but there are different elements, different intersections to that stigma as well, because not always a nicotine user is just a nicotine user. A nicotine user very often is a member of a marginalized community. It's an LGBTI person, it's an indigenous person, it is a person that lives in poverty, it is a person that has mental health problems, it is a person that is experiencing multiple elements of those intersecting injustices that are experienced in the world. So nicotine actually is a stigma that reflects a symptom to other stigmas or problems that a person is experiencing in their lives. So when we are trying to find a world where we are compassionate and we understand that human rights are all about freedom, dignity, and self-determination, and that one has the right to have their health uplifted and the best attainable health, which is a very fundamental human right, then you just kind of start wondering why is the stigma is there? Why that stigma it's obstructing self-determination, freedom, and justice and dignity? And I guess I guess there are reasons why the stigma is used to criminalize and to put obstacles on different types of movements. And the harm reduction movement is experiencing the stigma that drug use has, or the stigma that, for instance, HIV people were experiencing. But I guess what I want to say is that not always stigma is something that we have to think as bad, because that stigma often transforms in this frustration, and that energy that frustration brings in those individuals experiencing stigma is what creates these revolutions and change. Because there is just so much that a person can tolerate when they're living on constantly being stigmatized for everything they do, for what they think, how they, everything about themselves. And there is a point, I guess, that sometimes that frustration is kind of like that energy that transforms with time carbon in diamonds. And I want to reflect on that, because I guess most of the social justice movements these days are transforming slowly in those diamonds. And that's why we need to be mindful of time and be patient.
Okay. Wow. Truly, thank you. Those are very moving thoughts. And, we'll continue the conversation, Ellie, in the future. And I want to just quickly shift to Jeff, who I hope can tell us a question or a few questions or comments from the audience.
Well, one interesting topic that is raised by Andrew Thompson is that he have heard people that are saying that certain communities do not deserve, for example, harm reduction alternatives, or they don't reserve human rights per se, right? So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that kind of thinking?
I don't think that human rights are optional. So whoever is telling you that human rights are optional, it's a fascist, or it's a person that doesn't understand how human rights really work. So I don't think there is much point in arguing with this person, because I don't think that person even understands the concept of human rights. Human rights are not selective. Human rights are not just for a particular community. Human rights are universal. That's why I call universal human rights. And I think that's all I have to say. I guess maybe where they're coming in is in a situation where there is an invisible element or an invisible struggle that is hard to kind of like use as a catalyst to drive some change. Because I guess in the social justice movements, there are some elements to it that are very visible. I can see Black people, and I understand that Black Lives Matters, or if I see an LGBTI person, I can see in the face what is all that about. But with people that are using drugs, you cannot really have this unifying element of identity that can help you to understand what we are fighting for. And I think that's a problem, but I think that the peer support groups and what you are doing, all of you, Nancy, Nicholas, Jeff, what all these groups are doing is creating this culture of this community that is in a way unifying and showing we are here and we want justice. We want dignity. We want respect. We want self-determination. And I think if we keep going in that direction, if we keep unifying the community, if we're creating these groups, we are building a movement. And building and having a movement is the way to put a face to the struggle for harm reduction. That's what was done with HIV. HIV became a thing because there was a face that was visible. A marginalized community was the LGBTI community that was being affected the most by HIV. If it's not because HIV actually was affecting the LGBTI community, I don't think we will have harm reduction today.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm going to, again, wow. Turn to Nancy Lucas.